Imagine for a second that you're stranded. And I don't mean just lost in the woods. I mean you are stranded on a literal floating piece of sea ice for over a year and a half.
Yeah, thousands of miles from any kind of civilization.
Exactly. And your only food source is penguins and seals. Now, take the exact psychological tools that kept those guys from completely turning on each other and, well, use them to survive your freshman year living in a boarding house.
I mean, it sounds completely absurd when you put it like that, right?
It really does.
Comparing this massive life-or-death Arctic shipwreck to, a group of students sharing bathrooms in study halls. But human psychology under pressure, it actually scales in really fascinating ways.
Which is exactly what makes our source document today so incredibly compelling. Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive, where today we're looking at a piece called What a Boarder Can Learn from Ernest Shackleton.
Such a great premise.
Right. And our mission here is to understand how these extreme, harrowing survival lessons from an Antarctic expedition actually map onto the daily, high-pressure crucible of, well, living in a shared community.
Because a boarding environment is, honestly, it's a psychological pressure cooker.
Oh, absolutely. You eat together, you study together, you face all this intense academic and, emotional strain together. And the kicker is you can't just walk away when the vibe gets toxic.
You really can't. And that inability to escape is exactly where the overlap happens. Like, obviously, the physical environments couldn't be more different, but the mechanics of human behavior, how we react when our safety nets are just completely ripped away and we're stuck with the exact same 20 people, it's entirely identical.
So to really grasp the leadership lessons we're going to talk about, we have to kind of set the stage. We need to understand the sheer scale of the disaster that forced these psychological tolls out into the open in the first place.
Right, because this wasn't just a minor setback.
No, not at all. So we're looking at the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, right? It's 1914. Ernest Shackleton, this incredibly ambitious Anglo-Irish explorer, he sets out on a ship called the Endurance.
A very fitting name, as it turns out.
Yeah, no kidding. So his goal, this wildly ambitious goal, is the first complete land crossing of Antarctica. But the wild part is they never even touch the continent.
Right. The ship gets trapped in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea. And we aren't just talking about, being temporarily stuck in a snowdrift. The ocean basically freezes solid around them.
Just locked in.
Locked in. They drift, literally imprisoned in this ice for 9 agonizing months.
And then the ice shifts. The pressure of the ocean just literally crushes the ship. Like, you can almost imagine the sound of those massive timber beams just splintering like toothpicks.
It must have been terrifying.
Yeah. The Endurance sinks. November 21st, 1915. Living Shackleton and 27 men stranded on a frozen ocean. They've got, 3 small wooden lifeboats?
3 small boats, 0 communication with the outside world, and literally no one on the planet knows where they are.
Okay, so let's unpack this for you, the listener. It's like prepping all year for a massive high-stakes final exam. And suddenly the school completely burns to the ground.
Right, the goalpost completely vanishes.
Exactly. Your goal instantly ceases to be passing the test and becomes getting everyone out of the building alive.
And what's fascinating here is that this is the moment the text highlights as the ultimate test of leadership. Because that original mission, crossing the continent, is obliterated.
Yeah, it's just gone.
And human nature, especially for, highly driven people, is to fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested all this time, all this money and reputation into a specific goal, and when disaster strikes, the instinct is to stubbornly cling to the plan.
Oh man, you see that in academic settings all the time. Someone gets a terrible midterm grade, their original plan for that perfect GPA is ruined, and instead of, adjusting their study habits or asking for help,
They just dig their heels in.
right, they double down on a failing strategy. It's this total refusal to accept reality.
But Shackleton didn't do that. The moment that ship was crushed, he let go of the crossing. He didn't retreat into his own despair or, complain about the unfairness of the weather.
Which would be the natural reaction.
Totally. But he recognized that the mission had irrevocably changed. His undivided center of leadership shifted entirely to the protection of his people. His new goal was singular: get all 27 men home alive.
And this maps so perfectly onto the dynamic of a tight-knit community like a dorm. Leadership in a boarding house isn't about holding a formal title or being the most popular person in the room.
No, it's really not.
It's the ability to recognize when the mission of your community has suddenly changed and having the agility to pivot. Like one day the collective mission is everyone grinding for finals.
And then the next morning, the mission becomes supporting a roommate who just received, I don't know, devastating news from home.
Exactly. True leadership is dropping your immediate personal agenda to ensure the psychological survival of the person sitting next to you. The source material gives this really tangible example for students.
About communal responsibility, right?
Yeah, taking responsibility for communal life, like just cleaning up a shared space or mediating a stupid argument over dishes, even when it's incredibly inconvenient for you. It's recognizing that adding your own frustration to a tense situation just adds dead weight. You have to pivot to solutions.
Right. But recognizing the new mission is just the cognitive part.
Mhm.
Executing it under chronic stress, well, that introduces a whole new layer of complexity.
Oh, for sure.
Because keeping 27 freezing men from tearing each other apart for 5 months on a sheet of ice, that requires an astonishing level of emotional regulation.
Yeah, the historical diaries from the crew are wild to read. They consistently praise Shackleton for his unwavering composure. They literally wrote that his calm presence made them feel like survival was a foregone conclusion.
It's amazing.
But I really have to push back on this idea. Let's be real. If I'm camped on sea ice for 5 months eating penguin blubber, I am privately terrified.
Oh, I'd be a mess.
Right. Doesn't projecting this calm demeanor when you are actually panicked cross the line into, like, toxic positivity? Isn't that just bottling up your emotions in a way that's eventually going to lead to a breakdown?
That distinction is so crucial. But no, toxic positivity is a denial of reality. It's saying everything is fine, don't be sad. Shackleton never pretended they were safe. The psychology at play here is something called emotional contagion.
Emotional contagion. Okay, explain that.
Think of a room full of tuning forks. If you strike one violently, the sound waves will physically cause the other forks in the room to start vibrating at that exact same frantic frequency.
Wow, so panic literally transmits from person to person.
Rapidly, it infects everyone it touches. It degrades the group's collective decision-making and triggers the amygdala, the fear center of the brain.
Yeah.
But the reverse is also true.
A calm frequency spreads too.
Exactly. A grounded, steady frequency will calm the surrounding vibrations. Shackleton was terrified, obviously, but he understood that if he vibrated with panic, his men would fracture. By holding himself visibly steady, he provided a psychological anchor.
So here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. In a boarding house or any shared space, he was choosing to be the grounded tuning fork. It wasn't an ego trip to look tough.
Right? It was a deliberate act of service.
He was creating a safe psychological container so his men could actually engage their prefrontal cortexes and think clearly enough to survive. And if we apply that tuning fork analogy to a shared living space, the implications are huge.
They really are. The emotional state of one person inevitably shapes the emotional state of the whole room.
Managing your own reactions during a disagreement over something petty or, choosing to remain respectful when you feel wronged, that dictates the psychological safety of your entire floor. A calm environment doesn't magically eliminate the difficulty.
No, the exams are still brutal. The interpersonal conflicts still happen.
But that steadiness allows everyone within the environment to handle the difficulty without escalating it into a full-blown crisis. The source even points out that seeking support early, like going to a counselor or a trusted friend before your stress boils over, that's a vital form of the steadiness.
Because you are actively managing your own frequency.
Mhm.
We're taking responsibility for your emotional exhaust fumes, I guess you could say. Ensuring your panic doesn't infect the rest of the community.
Emotional exhaust fumes, I like that. Okay, so cultivating this calm is essentially a defensive strategy. It stops immediate panic.
Right.
But calmness alone doesn't get you rescued. Survival requires an offensive strategy to keep people moving forward month after month. Which leads us to what is easily my favorite and honestly the strangest survival tool in this entire document.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. The banjo.
The banjo. So Leonard Hussey was the ship's meteorologist. When they were packing the ship before the disaster, Shackleton specifically ordered Hussey to bring his heavy, cumbersome wooden banjo.
Some people mocked it, right?
No.
This is a ridiculous luxury.
Exactly. Space on an expedition is at a massive premium. But during those brutal months camped on the ice, that instrument became one of their most vital resources.
I could definitely anticipate some pushback here, though.
You already know. Look, if I am freezing to death and I haven't slept in a warm bed in a year and my roommate starts aggressively playing the banjo, I am throwing that thing into the Weddell Sea.
Honestly, fair.
How did this not drive them absolutely insane?
It's a completely fair reaction.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the neurobiology of hope. When humans are stripped of all control over their macro environment, like you can't stop the ice, you can't summon a rescue ship, the brain quickly slides into learned helplessness.
You just shut down.
Yeah, you just give up.
Oh.
Shackleton knew that if hope collapsed, the crew's mental state would flatline, and physical death would follow within days.
So the banjo was actually a tool to prevent learned helplessness.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It wasn't just about putting on a cheerful little concert. It was about enforcing a rhythm. Shackleton used the banjo to institute sing-alongs, which created these vital micro-routines. It delineated work time from rest time.
It forced them to focus on small things.
Right, manageable moments of normalcy. Hope, in this context, it's not a mood. It's not just sitting around wishing for a rescue boat. It is a highly deliberate, active stance.
That reframes optimism entirely. In the context of the intense academic and social pressures of a border, optimism isn't pretending that you didn't just fail a massive chemistry test.
And it isn't ignoring the fact that you were profoundly homesick.
Right. Optimism is the active choice to view setbacks as temporary hurdles rather than permanent verdicts on your identity.
It's refusing to let one brutal week dictate how the rest of the semester is going to unfold.
And just like panic, the source emphasizes that hope is incredibly contagious. When a peer feels completely defeated by a bad grade, and you sit down and offer genuine perspective, maybe reminding them of past successes, or just creating a space to laugh about how absurd the situation is, you are changing the atmosphere. You are playing the banjo for your house.
I love that phrase, playing the banjo for your house. You're providing the rhythm that keeps people moving forward. You give them a micro goal to focus on instead of the overwhelming impossibility of the macro situation.
And they absolutely needed that psychological armor for the sheer physical endurance required for the next phase. Because as much as this is a story about internal emotional regulation, the external reality of their escape proves the document's next major thesis.
Which is that true resilience is never a solo act.
You cannot survive on your own. The historical records of their escape genuinely sound like mythological fiction. It is almost difficult to comprehend the physical toll. Let's set the scene for a minute.
Go for it.
So it's April 1916. The ice is finally breaking up, so they are forced to launch those 3 small lifeboats. They spend 5 freezing, soaking, wet days battling the ocean before they hit Elephant Island.
Which is the first time they've stood on solid rock in 497 days.
Just imagine that. But Elephant Island is a desolate trap. It's far outside any commercial shipping lanes. Nobody is ever going to accidentally sail past and find them, so Shackleton makes an impossible calculation.
You have to go get help.
Right. He leaves 22 men on the island to wait, and he takes 5 men in the smallest lifeboat, the James Caird. This boat is barely 22 feet long, and they set out for a whaling station on South Georgia.
Which requires crossing 800 miles of the Drake Passage.
And for anyone who doesn't know, the Drake Passage is universally recognized as the most violent, treacherous stretch of ocean on planet Earth.
In a rowboat. In the dead of the Antarctic winter.
For 17 days. And they have to navigate using something called dead reckoning.
Right, because of the cloud cover.
Exactly. Dead reckoning means they couldn't see the sun or the stars through the storms. Their captain, Frank Worsley, had to literally calculate their position by estimating their speed, the ocean currents, and elapsed time.
It's basically highly educated guesswork while being thrown around by 50-foot waves.
If his math is off by even a fraction of a degree, they miss the island entirely and get swept into the open Atlantic to die.
But miraculously, Worsley's navigation holds. They land on South Georgia. But because the universe is incredibly cruel, the hurricane forces them to land on the uninhabited side of the island.
Of course it does.
The whaling station is on the completely opposite coast.
So the boat is wrecked. Shackleton, Worsley, and 1 other man leave the remaining 3 behind because they're too weak and they have to trek across the interior of the island. We are talking 36 continuous hours of climbing over unmapped, glaciated mountains with no specialized climbing gear.
They literally had screws pulled from the lifeboat pushed through the soles of their boots for traction.
That's insane. And when these 3 haggard, frostbitten, starving men finally stumble into the whaling station at Stromness, the station manager literally bursts into tears at the sight of them.
The sheer willpower is astounding. But this raises an important question, right?
Yeah.
What happens next is the culmination of the entire leadership philosophy.
Yeah, he doesn't just rest.
No. Shackleton immediately begins organizing a rescue ship. It takes him 4 separate attempts, battling impenetrable pack ice and horrific weather before he finally punches through and returns to Elephant Island.
On August 30th, 1916, over 2 years after they originally set sail. And here is the mind-boggling statistic that anchors this entire deep dive. Not a single man from the 27 crew members of the Endurance had died.
0 fatalities.
Zero.
And the vital takeaway for our listeners here is that this impossible survival was fundamentally collective. Shackleton did not survive alone.
Not a chance.
He relied utterly on Worsley's mathematical genius. He relied on the men who stayed behind on Elephant Island to maintain the routines and the hope so they wouldn't just lay down and die. They survived because they distributed the immense weight of the crisis based on each other's specific skills.
Right. Like, nobody survives an 800-mile journey in a rowboat by themselves. One person is desperately bailing freezing water, another is steering, another is chipping ice off the rigging so the boat doesn't capsize.
If one person decides to quit, everyone drowns.
Resilience is built together. And in a boarding community, the application is incredibly direct. You build real resilience when you support each other through intense periods, not just in the easy, comfortable moments.
It's about recognizing invisible burdens. You celebrate a friend's exhausting effort on a project just as much as you celebrate the person who naturally got an A.
Yeah, and you share the responsibilities of communal life so that the heavy lifting, whether that's organizing an event or just keeping the kitchen clean, isn't consistently dumped on the shoulders of a few exhausted people.
When a community looks after its own in that way, when the burdens are actively shared, difficult periods actually solidify the group's bond instead of fracturing it.
So, what does this all mean for you? We have covered a massive expanse of ice, ocean, and psychology today. The sheer distance between the Weddell Sea and a modern dorm room is vast.
It's basically a different planet.
But the mechanics of getting through it are identical. You may never have to cross glaciated mountains to save your friends, but in the close proximity of shared living where joy, loneliness, frustration, and the deep human need for belonging collide every single day, you are navigating real-world pressure.
And the required toolkit is exactly the same. Composed, grounded leadership, active, deliberate hope, and an absolute refusal to abandon anyone who is struggling.
It's about small, ordinary acts of steadiness, the quiet encouragement when someone is panicking over finals, the patience when a roommate is vibrating at a frantic frequency. That is the endurance spirit applied to daily life.
You know, before we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final lingering idea from the text that completely flips the narrative. And I really think it's worth chewing on.
Oh, I'm listening. Lay it on me.
So the standard reading of the Shackleton story is that his leadership and his emotional regulation saved his crew. He brought everyone home because he refused to leave a single person behind. But consider this flip perspective.
Okay.
Did the very act of taking responsibility for the lives of others actually save Shackleton himself?
Oh, wow.
Think about the psychology of being stranded on the ice. Despair is the easiest, most logical response. Letting go is easy. But when you actively choose to carry the immense weight of someone else's survival, does that burden actually armor you against your own despair?
Wait, so by focusing entirely on keeping his men alive, he fundamentally gave himself no psychological permission to give up.
Exactly. When you are solely responsible for yourself, the threshold for quitting is entirely up to you. But when others rely on your steadiness, the burden forces you to stand tall. So the ultimate question is, in a shared community, is taking care of others actually the ultimate survival mechanism for the person providing the care?
The burden becomes the armor. By choosing to play the banjo for someone else, you keep your own heart beating.
That's it, exactly.
That is an incredibly profound thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a massive exam, dealing with an impossibly difficult roommate, or just trying to navigate the daily friction of shared living, we hope you bring a little bit of that endurance spirit into your world today.
Remember, it's not about having perfect circumstances. It's about choosing to be the grounded tuning fork when the pressure is on.
Stay composed, find your banjo, and take care of your crew. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.